Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the American Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1895. A time when the Ozark Mountains of Missouri and Arkansas remained largely unmapped. Wilderness, dense forests hiding steep limestone bluffs, labyrinthine cave systems, and isolated valleys where communities lived largely untouched by the Industrial Revolution transforming America's cities. It was October when the hardwood forests blazed with autumn colors and the first cold winds swept down from the north. 5 men from Springfield, Missouri set out on what should have been a routine week-long hunting expedition. They were well-prepared, experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the region's challenges. None would ever return. Their names were Thomas Blackwood, age 42, a hardware store owner; James Conley, 39, the local physician; William Hartley, 36, who ran the town's only bank; Robert Fleming, 33, a school teacher; and Charles Preston, 28, the youngest of the group who worked as a telegraph operator. These were respected community members, family men with stable lives and promising futures. Their disappearance sent shockwaves through Springfield and would become one of the most perplexing mysteries in Ozark history. The men departed on October 12, 1895, taking a train to the small settlement of Winona in Shannon County, deep in the eastern Ozarks. From there, they hired a local guide to take them by wagon to their planned campsite near the headwaters of the Current River. The guide, Elijah Thornton, left them at their camp with plans to return in 7 days. When he returned on October 19th, he found an abandoned campsite that would become the center of one of the most disturbing investigations in the region's history. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not simply that 5 men vanished without a trace, but rather the strange circumstances surrounding their disappearance and the troubling evidence uncovered in subsequent investigations. The official record remains incomplete, with crucial documents mysteriously missing from county archives. What follows is an attempt to piece together what might have happened based on newspaper accounts, personal journals, and interviews conducted in the years following the incident. At the abandoned campsite, investigators found 5 bedrolls neatly arranged inside the tent. A cooking pot still hung over the ashes of a long dead fire. Their rifles were stacked carefully against a tree. 5 sets of hunting gear were accounted for, minus only the clothes the men would have been wearing. Nothing suggested a struggle or hasty departure. It was as if the men had simply walked away from camp and vanished into the wilderness, all 5 of them simultaneously. The initial search party noted several peculiar details that would later be omitted from official reports. According to an account published in the Springfield Republican on October 24, 1895, the men's personal effects were arranged with unusual precision. The 5 hunting knives had been placed in a perfect star pattern on a flat rock near the fire pit, wrote reporter Samuel Winters. The men's tobacco pouches were lined up according to size. Such deliberate arrangement suggests the abandonment was not precipitous, but rather methodical in nature. Thornton immediately rode to the nearest settlement, the small logging community of Eminence, to report the missing hunters. The Shannon County Sheriff organized a search party of 25 men who combed the surrounding forests for nearly 2 weeks. Not a single clue as to the men's whereabouts was discovered. No bodies, no blood trails, no discarded personal effects. Nothing. The lack of physical evidence puzzled even the most experienced trackers in the search party. The ground around the camp showed no footprints leading away from the site despite recent rainfall that should have preserved such markings. Local hunters familiar with the area reported an unusual silence in the forest, an absence of bird calls and animal sounds that typically indicated a natural predator in the vicinity. Yet, no known predator in the Ozarks could have taken 5 armed men without leaving evidence of a struggle. The newspapers of the time reported extensively on the mysterious disappearance. The Springfield Republican ran daily updates on the search efforts. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch sent a special correspondent who filed dramatic reports speculating on possible scenarios from bear attacks to outlaw gangs. As weeks passed with no developments, public interest gradually waned. By December 1895, the story had been relegated to occasional mentions, and by early 1896, it seemed the case would remain permanently unsolved. But this is where our investigation truly begins. In 1952, during renovations of the old Shannon County Courthouse, a sealed metal box was discovered inside a wall cavity. The box contained a leather-bound journal belonging to Sheriff Martin Crawford, who had led the original investigation. The journal had never been included in the official record, and its contents shed disturbing new light on what may have happened to the 5 hunters from Springfield. The discovery of Crawford's journal was itself surrounded by unusual circumstances. According to courthouse records, the renovation work had been prompted by structural issues in the building's east wall, a wall that had shown no previous signs of damage. The construction foreman Lloyd Branson later told the Eminence Current River Press that the wall cavity containing the box appeared to have been deliberately created during the original construction of the courthouse in 1871, some 24 years before the hunters' disappearance. The metal box bore no dust or corrosion despite its decades-long concealment. Crawford's journal entries begin on October 20, 1895, the day after Thornton reported the men missing. The early entries describe standard search procedures, organizing volunteers, establishing search grids, interviewing potential witnesses. But on October 25th, the tone of the entries changes dramatically. Crawford writes, "Found strange markings today, half a mile northwest of the campsite, unlike anything I've seen before. Not animal tracks, not human footprints. The men refused to go near them. Something not right about this place." The journal describes the markings in clinical detail. Parallel lines approximately 4 and apart pressed deep into the soil, not continuous, but appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals, as if whatever made them alternated between walking on the ground and written elsewhere. The lines terminate at the base of a limestone bluff where no cave entrance or passage is visible. Yet, the tracks simply end there, as if continuing through solid rock. The following day's entry is even more disturbing. "Thornton took me to a cave system not marked on any maps, says the locals avoid it. Inside, we found an abandoned lantern that Thornton identified as belonging to Dr. Conley. No other signs of the men. The cave extends deeper than our lights could penetrate. The air smells wrong, like metal and something else I cannot name." Crawford organized a specialized team to explore the cave system. Only 3 men volunteered: John Reynolds, a miner familiar with underground environments; Thomas Wilcox, an experienced hunter known for his tracking abilities; and Peter Hammond, the county surveyor who brought mapping equipment. They ventured into the darkness on October 27th. Crawford's entry that evening reads simply, "Reynolds returned alone. The others are gone." Reynolds won't speak of what happened. His hair has turned completely white. "I'm ending the search tomorrow. Whatever took those men, it's still down there." The journal includes a rough transcript of Crawford's attempt to interview Reynolds. Asked him what happened to Wilcox and Hammond. He stared at the wall for nearly 5 minutes before responding. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "They're still walking," he said, following it deeper. I almost did too. Would have if my lantern hadn't gone out. In the darkness, I couldn't see it anymore, so its pull weakened. I found the entrance again by touch alone. When asked what it was, Reynolds began to shake uncontrollably. He would say nothing more. The next entry, dated October 29, 1895, describes Crawford's meeting with county officials. He writes, "They've agreed to seal all records of the cave. It will be removed from maps. The official report will state that the search yielded no results. This is for the best. Some truths should remain buried." Crawford's final entry is dated November 5th. "Reynolds hanged himself last night. Left no note. Dream of the cave now. A voice is calling from the darkness. I understand why he did it. The pull grows stronger each night. I've instructed my deputy to board up my bedroom window. I fear what I might do otherwise. There's a presence in my mind that wasn't there before. Something waiting, something patient." The journal ends abruptly. Records show that Sheriff Martin Crawford resigned his position in December 1895, citing health concerns. He moved to Colorado and died 3 years later of what was officially recorded as nervous exhaustion. The attending physician noted in private correspondence that Crawford had been admitted to a sanitarium after repeatedly attempting to travel east toward Missouri for reasons he could not or would not articulate. The discovery of Crawford's journal in 1952 prompted a brief renewal of interest in the case. A reporter for the Springfield News leader, Michael Harrison, began investigating. He tracked down elderly residents who remembered the incident, including Thornton's daughter, Martha, who was 15 years old at the time of the disappearance. Now in her 70s, Martha shared troubling recollections that had never before been made public. According to Martha, her father had been deeply disturbed by what he found at the hunter's campsite. "P wouldn't talk about it much," she told Harrison. "But once when he had had too much whiskey, he told me there had been a 6th bedroll in the tent and 6 sets of gear. But only 5 men had gone on that hunting trip. This revelation raises disturbing questions. If a 6th person had joined the hunting party, who were they? And why was their presence never mentioned in any official report? The train manifest from Springfield to Winona listed only the 5 known hunters. None of the men's families reported them traveling with an additional companion. Yet Martha Thornton's account suggests someone or something had integrated itself into their group without being acknowledged. Martha also claimed that her father had found something else at the campsite that didn't appear in any official reports: a journal belonging to Robert Fleming, the school teacher. Thornton had kept it hidden all those years. After his death in 1919, Martha found it among his possessions. She gave it to Harrison, who included selected passages in his unpublished manuscript. Fleming's journal entries provide the only first-hand account of what the hunting party experienced in their final days. The early entries describe typical hunting activities and camp life. On October 14th, Fleming writes, "Strange sounds in the forest last night. Not animal, not human. Blackwood thinks it might be wind in the caves. Conley disagrees. Whatever it is, it's keeping us awake." The entry continues. Preston seems most affected by the sounds. He sits facing the forest for hours listening. When asked what he hears, he says it's like a conversation just beyond comprehension, as if the sounds almost form words. Artley suggested it might be water echoing through the cave systems known to honeycomb these mountains. That explanation satisfies most of us, though Conley remains skeptical. October 15th, Preston insists someone is watching us from the tree-line. We've seen no one, but game has become scarce. Hartley suggested moving camp, but Blackwood refuses. Says we're overreacting to normal forest sounds. The tension among us grows. At dinner, Conley and Blackwood had a heated argument about the purpose of our trip. Blackwood insisted we came solely for hunting, while Conley referenced the real reason without elaboration. The others grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. I'm beginning to wonder if I was told everything about this expedition before agreeing to join. This passage suggests the possibility that the hunting trip may have had an undisclosed purpose, at least in the minds of some participants. Historical records show that Dr. James Conley had previously published a monograph in a medical journal regarding unusual cases of wilderness catalepsy he had documented in patients who ventured into remote areas of the Ozarks. The paper was largely dismissed by the medical establishment of the time, and Conley never published on the subject again. October 16th found peculiar footprints around the perimeter of our camp this morning. Too narrow to be human, too structured to be animal. Conley made sketches. None of us can identify what might have made them. Preston, increasingly agitated, claims he saw someone or something standing among the trees last night. A tall figure, he says, but oddly proportioned. Blackwood still dismisses our concerns, though I notice he's kept his rifle closer today. The strange sounds continue each night, growing louder. They seem to come from all directions at once, as if the forest itself were speaking. Fleming's description of the footprints matches similar accounts from other incidents in the Ozark region. In 1887, a surveying team in neighboring Oregon County documented finding narrow, elongated impressions, approximately 14 in length, with what appeared to be only 3 toic projections at the front. The team's report was filed with county authorities, but never published. In 1912, a hunter in Crawford County described finding similar tracks near the entrance to a previously unexplored cave system. Local newspapers treated the account as a curiosity, suggesting the tracks might belong to an undiscovered species of mountain wildlife. October 17th, Hartley discovered a cave entrance half a mile from camp, unexplored, not on any maps. Blackwood and Conley went to investigate while the rest of us continued hunting. They returned visibly shaken. Conley's hands trembled so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. Neither will discuss what they saw, but they've agreed we should leave tomorrow, cutting our trip short. Preston is missing. Went to collect firewood before dusk and hasn't returned. Search until nightfall yielded nothing. We'll resume at first light. Fleming adds a troubling postscript to this entry. Found Blackwood sitting alone by the fire at 2 a.m. staring into the flames. Asked if he was concerned about Preston. He looked at me with an expression I cannot describe. Not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned understanding. He said, "It's been watching us since we arrived, learning our patterns, our relationships, deciding." When I asked what he meant, he shook his head and returned to his tent. I'm writing this by lantern light, unable to sleep. The sounds from the forest are louder tonight, and if I strain my hearing, they almost resolve into words, almost. The final entry, dated October 18th. Preston returned at dawn, won't say where he was, sits staring at the fire, unresponsive. His boots are caked with a reddish clay, unlike the soil around our camp. Blackwood thinks he may have fallen and hit his head. We're breaking camp now. Conley says, the entry ends mid-sentence. The rest of the pages had been torn out. What happened after Preston's return remains the central mystery of this case. Whatever Fleming witnessed in those final hours died with him, or perhaps continues with him in some form we cannot comprehend. The torn pages suggest information too disturbing to preserve, or perhaps too dangerous to leave for others to find. Harrison attempted to locate the cave mentioned in both Crawford's and Fleming's journals. Using topographical maps and Martha Thornton's vague recollections of her father's descriptions, he identified a potential location along the current river's headwaters. In March 1953, Harrison and 2 local guides ventured into the area. They never returned. A search party found Harrison's abandoned campsite 3 days later. His notebooks were missing. One of the guides' jackets was found half a mile away, torn and stained with what forensic tests later identified as printing ink, not blood. The Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted an extensive search, but found no trace of Harrison or his companions. The case was officially classified as a wilderness accident, possibly involving a flash flood or animal attack. What the official report omits is that the search party also found Harrison's camera hanging from a tree branch near the abandoned camp. When the film was developed, most of the exposures showed only blurry forest scenes. The final 3 frames, however, depicted something unusual. The first showed what appeared to be a narrow cave entrance, partially obscured by vegetation. The second captured a stone formation inside the cave that, according to the photographer who developed the film, resembled a doorway, though its proportions seemed wrong, too tall and narrow for comfortable human passage. The third and final image was completely black, as if taken in total darkness, except for what might have been a single elongated figure standing at a distance, only partially captured by the camera flash. The negatives were retained as evidence in the case file. In 1958, a fire in the records department of the Missouri State Highway Patrol destroyed numerous files, including all materials related to Harrison's disappearance. The photographs, if they ever existed outside of witness descriptions, were lost. The story might have ended there, forgotten again if not for a discovery made in 1968 during an archaeological survey of cave systems in Shannon County. Dr. Elizabeth Winters, a geologist with the University of Missouri, was documenting previously unmapped cave networks when her team discovered a sealed chamber nearly 2 meters into a complex system near the current river headwaters. The chamber appeared to have been deliberately sealed with a wall of stacked stones. This construction method did not match known indigenous building techniques in the region, nor did it resemble the work of early European settlers. According to Winter's field notes, the mortar binding the stones contained an unidentified organic material that had preserved its adhesive properties despite the damp cave environment. Inside the chamber, they found evidence of human activity, the remnants of old lanterns, a rusted hunting knife, and fragments of leather that might once have been shoes or boots. Most significantly, they discovered a metal container protecting a stack of paper sheets, pages that appeared to have been torn from a journal. The chamber's walls were covered with markings that Winters initially assumed were petroglyphs from an unknown indigenous culture. Upon closer examination, she determined that the markings had been carved much more recently, perhaps within the last century. They formed complex geometric patterns that, according to Winters' notes, created an unsettling optical effect when viewed by lantern light, seeming to recede into the stone itself, suggesting depth where none existed. Before Winters could properly document these findings, university administrators abruptly terminated her research grant and recalled her team. The recovered items were confiscated by unnamed government officials, citing historical preservation protocols. Winters protested the action and was subsequently removed from her position. In a letter to a colleague dated July 1968, she wrote, "What we found contradicts everything we understand about this region's settlement patterns." The markings on the cave walls weren't made by any known culture, and the journal pages, I only glimpsed them briefly, but they appeared to be signed, R. Fleming. What troubles me most is not what we found, but the vehemence with which certain parties wish to ensure it remains hidden. Winters attempted to publicize her findings, but academic journals rejected her submissions without review. She eventually abandoned her academic career and relocated to Vermont. She declined all subsequent requests for interviews until her death in 1984. In her personal papers discovered after her death, Winters had made detailed sketches of the wall markings from memory. She also included a partial transcription of what she remembered from the journal pages. The transcription reads, "I understand now what Conley meant. It isn't something watching us. It's somewhere watching us. A place that has become aware. The cave is merely its entrance, not its body. Blackwood has already given in. His eyes are empty now. Preston was the first, but Blackwood followed quickly. Hartley resists, but I've seen him staring at the cave entrance when he thinks no one is watching. Conley understands the science of it. He called it a dimensional anomaly, a thin point between here and elsewhere. I believe it is simpler than that. Some places are hungry, some places need to be fed. The remainder of the transcription becomes increasingly fragmented, with Winters noting she could not recall the exact wording. She concludes with a disturbing observation. The final page I saw appeared to be written in a different hand, more precise, less human somehow. It contained only a list of names. The 5 hunters were there, each name precisely crossed out. Below them were other names, dozens of them, including Martin Crawford and others I didn't recognize. Some were crossed out, others were not. The last name on the list was Elizabeth Winters. It was not crossed out. Here, our documentary investigation must confront the troubling pattern of silence that has surrounded this case since its inception. Multiple investigations have been abruptly terminated. Records have vanished from archives. Witnesses have either refused to speak or disappeared themselves. The pattern suggests not merely unfortunate coincidences, but a deliberate effort to obscure whatever happened to those 5 hunters in October 1895. What we can piece together from surviving accounts suggests that Blackwood, Conley, Hartley, Fleming, and Preston encountered something in the Ozark wilderness that defied conventional explanation. The discovery of a 6th bedroll implies an unknown person may have joined their party, whether invited or not. The cave system figures prominently in multiple accounts, suggesting whatever occurred may have centered on that location. The geographic region where the hunters disappeared has several unusual characteristics that may be relevant to understanding their fate. The current river head orders emerge from a complex underground aquifer system that remains incompletely mapped. Hydrological surveys conducted in the 1950s revealed that certain water sources in the area contain mineral compositions, unlike any others in the region, with elevated levels of rare earth elements and trace compounds that normally occur only in deep geological formations. The area also exhibits occasional magnetic anomalies that have been documented since the early 1900s. Compass readings can vary by as much as 45 degrees within a space of a few hundred yards. Modern equipment experiences interference patterns that some researchers have compared to electromagnetic pulses. Local folklore attributes these phenomena to deposits of iron ore or other minerals, but geological surveys have found no evidence to support these explanations. Local folklore offers additional, if unreliable, perspectives. Shannon County residents have long told stories of the Ozark Hollows, certain remote valleys where, according to legend, the boundary between our world and somewhere else grows thin. These areas are characterized by magnetic anomalies, unexplained sounds, and a disorienting quality that causes travelers to become lost despite familiar surroundings. A collection of oral histories compiled by the Missouri Historical Society in the 1930s includes accounts from multiple generations of Ozark residents describing places where the woods go quiet and time slows down. Several narratives mention travelers who returned from such areas with no memory of their experiences, or who returned changed in subtle but unsettling ways. One recurring element in these stories involves individuals who venture into certain caves and encounter someone who looks like you, standing just ahead, always just ahead, leading deeper. In 1922, a trapper named Jeremiah Hollister filed a report with the Winona Sheriff, claiming to have found an old campsite deep in the woods that contained 5 sets of clothes, neatly folded with boots placed alongside, as if the owners had simply stepped out of them and walked away. The kai's location, he described, roughly matched the area where the 1895 hunting party had disappeared. When authorities attempted to have Hollister lead them to the site, he refused, saying, "Some places don't want to be found twice." He left the region shortly thereafter. County records indicate that Hollister relocated to Idaho, where he lived in isolation until his death in 1946. His personal effects, cataloged as part of probate proceedings, included a small leather pouch containing 5 pocket watch fobs, each bearing the initials of one of the missing hunters. The fobs were sent to the Shannon County Historical Society, but the package never arrived. Postal records show it was delivered to the courthouse, but no record exists of its receipt. The few surviving newspaper accounts from 1895 mention another detail largely overlooked in subsequent investigations. In the weeks before the hunter's disappearance, residents near the current river headwaters reported unusual atmospheric phenomena, unexplained lights in the night sky, sudden temperature drops, and a persistent low-frequency hum that caused livestock to become agitated. Similar reports emerged briefly in 1953, coinciding with Harrison's disappearance, and again in 1968 during Winter's truncated investigation. A meteorological journal kept by the station master at Winona from 1890 to 1901 documents unusual weather patterns in the weeks preceding the hunter's disappearance. He notes, October 1895, second consecutive night of ground fog that moves against the wind. Fog appears to emanate from the eastern hills rather than rising from the valleys, as is typical. Oak T6, 1895. Barometric pressure fluctuations unlike anything previously recorded. Pressure drops and rises several times within hours, with no corresponding changes in weather conditions. OCT 10, 1895 reports from farmers of unusual animal behavior, livestock refusing to graze in certain areas, wild game migrating out of season. In 1962, a hydrological survey of the current river basin detected a significant anomaly beneath the area where the hunters were last seen. Using early ground-penetrating radar, researchers identified what appeared to be a massive chamber nearly 300 feet beneath the surface, far larger than any known cave in the region. The survey report notes that the chamber appears to contain a substantial body of water or other liquid, with unusual reflective properties. Funding for further investigation was denied. The lead researcher, Dr. Kenneth Morrow, appealed the decision, writing to the Department of Interior. The acoustic properties of this subterranean chamber are unlike anything previously documented in Carr's topography. Sound waves directed into the chamber return with altered frequency patterns suggesting either unusual geometric features or properties of the enclosed medium that modify sound transmission. This phenomenon warrants thorough scientific investigation. His appeal was denied. Mororo's subsequent research proposals were systematically rejected until his retirement in 1967. In an oral history recorded shortly before his death in 1976, Mororo claimed that a government official had visited him shortly after his discovery and advised him to find another research interest if you value your career. The mystery deepened in 1965 when a retired forester named Raymond Parker came forward with a strange account. Parker claimed that in October 1895, while working as a young lumber surveyor, he had been camping approximately 15 miles from where the hunting party disappeared. He described being awakened before dawn by a sound like 1,000 voices whispering together. In the forest clearing before him, Parker claimed to have seen 5 men walking in single file. They moved like sleepwalkers, he told the Shannon County Historical Society. Their eyes were open but empty. They were following someone or something that I couldn't quite see. Just a darkness darker than the night around it. Parker's account might be dismissed as the confused recollection of an elderly man or an attempt to insert himself into a well-known local mystery. However, county records confirm that Parker was indeed working in the area in 1895, and his description of the 5 men matched the missing hunters in specific details he could not have known unless he had genuinely seen them. Parker added a detail that had never appeared in any public account of the case. He claimed that the 5 men were not simply walking in a line, but were connected to each other and to whatever led them by what he described as threads of light, too thin to be ropes, stretching from their eyes to the figure ahead. This description corresponds with no known optical phenomenon, but bears a disturbing similarity to the dimensional filaments that Dr. James Conley had theorized in his unpublished research. What happened to Thomas Blackwood, James Conley, William Hartley, Robert Fleming, and Charles Preston? The official record remains silent. Their bodies were never recovered. No definitive explanation has ever been provided for their disappearance. Their families waited in vain for answers that never came. Eventually, death certificates were issued, listing the cause as presumed accidental death in wilderness. But the pattern of suppressed evidence, terminated investigations, and disappearing witnesses suggests a more troubling possibility. That what happened to those 5 men in October 1895 represented something so far outside conventional understanding that those who glimpsed the truth chose silence over revelation. The Ozark Mountains hold many secrets. Deep forests conceal abandoned homesteads where generations lived and died in isolation. Cave systems extend for miles beneath the surface, many still unmapped. Remote hollows receive no sunlight for months at a time. In such places, perhaps it becomes possible for something to exist beyond our ordinary conception of reality. Not supernatural, but natural in a way we have yet to comprehend. Consider the pattern of behaviors reported across multiple sources. The strange sounds, unlike any animal or human. The unexplained watching presence felt by multiple members of the hunting party. The footprints that matched no known species. The 6th bedroll where only 5 should have been. The cave that appeared on no maps. The men who walked away from their camp, leaving everything behind, as if stepping out of one reality and into another. In 1957, a geological survey team reported unusual magnetic readings in the area where the hunters disappeared. Compass needles would spin unpredictably. Electronic equipment malfunctioned. The team leader noted in his report, the local topography creates a natural amphitheater that might amplify certain low-frequency sounds below normal human hearing threshold, potentially affecting cognitive function. The report was classified and remained unavailable until a Freedom of Information request unearthed it in 1966. The report included a technical appendix that was heavily redacted in the released version. The few visible sections describe standing wave patterns and infrasonic resonance that could theoretically induce altered perceptual states in human subjects. One unredacted paragraph suggests that certain geometric features of the local cave systems, combined with the mineral composition of the surrounding rock, might create acoustic properties capable of affecting neural activity when experienced over extended periods. The report concludes that such effects would be most pronounced during specific atmospheric conditions that occur seasonally, conditions that would have been present in October 1895. A Department of Interior memorandum dated 1959 references the region as Zone 47A and designates it as restricted for ongoing observational studies. No explanation is provided for what was being observed or by whom. Public access to several thousand acres surrounding the hunters' last known location was restricted until 1964, ostensibly for forest management purposes. When the land was reopened to the public, it had been substantially altered. New hiking trails circumvented the area where the hunters' camp had been located. Cave entrances in the vicinity had been sealed with concrete plugs disguised to look like natural rockfalls. A ranger station was established nearby, staffed year-round. Despite the remote location and minimal visitor traffic, Martha Thornton, in her final interview before her death in 1957, added one last troubling detail to the story. According to Martha, her father had taken something else from the abandoned campsite that he kept hidden until his death, a pocket watch belonging to William Hartley. The watch had stopped at 3:17, presumably indicating when the hunting party had abandoned their camp, but what troubled Thornton was the condition of the watch. The glass was clouded, Martha recalled, as if it had been exposed to intense heat, and the metal was warped in a way P couldn't explain. He said it looked like the watch had aged 100 years in a single moment. Even more disturbing was what Martha's father had found inside the watch case. Hartley, like many men of that era, kept a small photograph of his family inside his pocket watch. When Thornton opened the case, he found the photograph still intact, but the faces of Hartley's wife and children had been meticulously excised, cut out with what appeared to be surgical precision. This detail aligned with an observation made by Sheriff Crawford in his journal not previously mentioned in our account. On October 26, 1895, he wrote, "Examined personal effects found at the campsite. Each hunter had brought photographs of loved ones, as men often do when traveling. In every photograph, the faces have been removed, not torn or burned, but precisely cut out with a blade. The cuts are identical in all images, suggesting they were altered at the same time by the same hand. But who would do such a thing, and why?" In 1963, an amateur historian named Gerald Matt attempted to locate the descendants of the missing hunters. He discovered that the Blackwood, Conley, Hartley, Fleming, and Preston family lines had all experienced unusual patterns in the decades following the disappearance. Infant mortality rates were significantly higher than the regional average. Mental illness occurred with disturbing frequency, and most strikingly, male descendants frequently reported the same recurring dream of walking through endless cave passages, following a figure they could never quite see. Matt published his findings in a small monograph titled "Echoes Through Generations: The Lingering Impact of the Shannon County Disappearances." The publication received little attention at the time, but has since become a sought-after collector's item among researchers of Ozark folklore. In the monograph, Matt writes, "Whatever happened to these men in 1895 cast a shadow that extends through time, affecting those who share their bloodlines. It suggests a continuity of experience that transcends conventional understanding of how trauma propagates through generations. The final piece of this fragmented puzzle emerged in 1968, coinciding with Dr. Winters's terminated cave exploration. A nursing home resident in Springfield named Albert Jenkins, claiming to be the nephew of James Conley, provided a deposition to a local attorney. Jenkins, then 83 and in failing health, claimed that his uncle had not disappeared in 1895, as officially reported. According to Jenkins, Conley had returned to Springfield 3 weeks after the hunting party vanished. But he had returned changed. He wasn't the same man, Jenkins stated in his deposition. He looked like my uncle, spoke with his voice, but something was different. His movements were wrong, too precise, too mechanical, and his eyes, there was nothing behind them. Jenkins claimed that Conley lived in seclusion in his sister's home for nearly 6 months. He refused all visitors and would not practice medicine. At night, the family would hear him pacing and speaking in a language they didn't recognize. According to Jenkins, Conley spent hours writing in journals, filling thousands of pages with text and diagrams that made no sense to his family. Then, on April 23, 1896, he disappeared again, this time permanently. The day before he left, Jenkins recounted, he told my mother, "They're still walking, all of them. I have to join them again. The journey isn't finished." When she asked where they were walking to, he smiled in a way that frightened her, to meet what waits at the center. He said it's patient. It's always been patient, but now it's awake. The journals allegedly remained in the family's possession until a house fire in 1917 destroyed all but a few pages. Jenkins provided these surviving fragments to the attorney, but they vanished from the law firm's files before they could be properly examined. Jenkins died 2 weeks after giving his deposition. County records show no evidence that James Conley ever returned to Springfield after the hunting party disappeared. No death certificate was issued until 7 years after the incident, as was standard procedure for missing persons at that time. Yet, the 1900 census includes a curious entry: a James Conley, physician, listed as residing at the exact address of Conley's sister. The entry appears to have been added after the census was completed in different handwriting. A Springfield City directory from 1896 similarly lists James Conley as residing at his sister's address with a notation hours by appointment only. No patients from this period ever came forward to confirm having been treated by Conley after his supposed disappearance. His sister, when interviewed by local newspapers in 1900 regarding the census discrepancy, denied that her brother had returned, calling it a cruel clerical error that had given her false hope. Yet, local postal records indicate that someone at that address received professional medical journals addressed to Dr. James Conley throughout 1896. A delivery log from a local pharmacy shows regular orders of unusual chemical compounds delivered to the residents during the same period. The final such delivery, dated April the 22nd, 1896, one day before Conley allegedly disappeared again, included chemicals typically used in photographic development processes, though Conley had no known interest in photography before his disappearance. What are we to make of these scattered, often contradictory pieces of evidence? The official narrative that 5 hunters simply became lost in the wilderness and perished from exposure or accident fails to account for the absence of remains, the abandoned equipment, and the multiple witness accounts of unusual phenomena preceding and following their disappearance. If we set aside conventional explanations, what possibilities remain? Some researchers have suggested that the current river cave system might contain pockets of naturally occurring gases that could induce hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. Others point to the region's unusual geological features, which could potentially generate electromagnetic fields capable of affecting brain function. These scientific hypotheses, while plausible, fail to account for the pattern of suppressed investigations and missing evidence that has characterized this case from the beginning. In 1954, a geochemist named Dr. Harold Linden published a paper in an obscure scientific journal proposing that certain rare combinations of minerals under specific conditions of temperature and pressure could create what he called perceptual altering fields. He theorized that such fields might explain accounts of time distortion and spatial disorientation reported by cave explorers throughout history. The paper received little attention at the time, but Linden's subsequent research was supported by a grant from an unnamed government agency. None of his findings were ever published, and Linden himself refused all interviews after 1958, abruptly abandoning his academic career to become a reclusive organic farmer in New Mexico. A colleague from this period, Dr. Margaret Chen, later claimed that Linden had conducted field research in the Ozarks shortly before his withdrawal from academia. In a 1972 interview with a fringe scientific publication, Chen stated, "Harold returned from Missouri completely changed. He burned his research notes and destroyed laboratory samples he'd collected. He would only say that some knowledge isn't meant for us and that certain doorways should remain closed." He seemed genuinely frightened by whatever he discovered. Perhaps most disturbing is the implication that whatever happened to those 5 hunters in 1895 was not an isolated incident. The recurrence of similar phenomena in 1953 and 1968 coinciding with renewed investigations suggests a persistent anomaly rather than a single event. If Parker's account is accurate, the men did not die in the conventional sense, but were instead led away, conscious but not in control of their actions, by something that has remained in those forests for decades. Local newspaper archives reveal other potential connections. In 1901, 3 loggers disappeared from a camp near Eminence, leaving behind their equipment and personal belongings. In 1923, a geologist from Washington University vanished while conducting research in the area. His campsite found intact with meals still set out on plates as if abandoned mid-meal. In 1944, 2 hunters from Kansas City were reported missing. Their truck was discovered parked at a trailhead, their camping gear unused inside it. None of these individuals were ever found. A pattern emerges across these incidents. Individuals who ventured into specific areas of the Shannon County wilderness and never returned, leaving behind orderly campsites with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. In each case, initial intensive searches yielded no results. In each case, official investigations concluded with unusual abruptness. And in each case, those who participated in the searches reported experiencing unexplained phenomena, disorientation, missing time, unusual sounds, and a persistent sense of being watched. The Ozark Mountains have changed significantly since 1895. Tourism has brought paved roads and hiking trails to once remote areas. Cave systems have been mapped and developed for visitors. The current river is now part of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, protected and regularly patrolled by park rangers. Yet, there remain sections of the deep backcountry that see few human visitors. Places where cell phones lose signal, where GPS devices show impossible locations, where experienced hikers report a persistent sense of being watched. Park Service records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests show an unusual pattern of restricted zones within the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. Certain areas are marked on internal maps as unsuitable for recreation or environmentally sensitive, despite showing no obvious ecological features requiring special protection. These zones roughly correspond to locations associated with historical disappearances, including the area where the 1895 hunting party was last seen. Park ranger logs from 1972 to 1998 include numerous references to maintenance of Site 47A perimeters and standard observational protocols. Budget allocations include line items for specialized monitoring equipment installed throughout the restricted zones. The purpose of this equipment is never specified, nor is the nature of what was being monitored. In 2007, a backcountry ranger named David Hollister, no relation to the trapper from 1922, filed an unusual incident report. While patrolling a remote section of the park near the hunter's last known location, Hollister discovered what he described as a perfect circle of dead vegetation, approximately 20 ft in diameter. At the center of the circle was a depression in the ground that appeared to be a collapsed cave entrance. As Hollister approached the site, his radio produced a sound like thousands of whispered voices speaking simultaneously. His watch stopped at precisely 3:17 p.m. Hollister reported the location and returned to Ranger headquarters. When a team went to investigate the following day, they could find no trace of the vegetation circle or the collapsed cave entrance despite having GPS coordinates. Hollister insisted he could lead them back to the exact location, but upon arrival found nothing unusual. The incident was attributed to disorientation and dismissed. Hollister requested transfer to another park shortly thereafter. In his personal journal, which became available after his death in a car accident in 2009, Hollister wrote, "I know what I saw. I know what I heard." The voices were speaking words, though not in any language I recognized. And as I stood at the edge of that circle, I felt a pull, not physical, but mental, a compulsion to step forward, to descend into that depression. Had my radio not crackled at that moment, breaking my concentration, I believe I would have done so, and I believe I would not have returned. The journal entry continues. The strangest part came that night. I dreamed of 5 men I've never met walking single file into a cave mouth. They turned to look at me as they entered, their eyes empty, their movements synchronized. The last man in line raised his hand, beckoning me to follow. When I woke, I found myself standing in my living room fully dressed with my hiking boots on. The front door was wide open. As recently as 2014, hikers in the area have reported unusual experiences, unexplained time lapses, temporary disorientation, and the sensation of being followed by someone just out of sight. These reports cluster around the area where the 1895 hunting party was last seen, though few of those reporting such experiences are aware of that historical connection. A group of geology students from the University of Missouri conducted unauthorized research in the restricted zone in 2012 using ground-penetrating radar. They detected what appeared to be an extensive cave system, not documented on any official maps. Their equipment malfunctioned before they could complete their survey, and university administrators confiscated their partial data upon their return to campus. One student later anonymously posted online, "What we found doesn't make sense. The cave structure we detected doesn't match normal karst formation patterns. It's too geometric, too regular. It looks almost designed, but it's hundreds of feet underground in solid bedrock. And something about the internal spaces created interference patterns with our equipment that our professors can't explain. What remains most disturbing about this case is not what we know, but what has been systematically removed from the record. The missing journal pages, the disappeared evidence, the terminated investigations, the witnesses who fall silent or vanish themselves. This pattern suggests not merely an unsolved mystery, but a mystery someone or something does not want solved. In 1957, historian William Gannett attempted to compile a comprehensive account of the 1895 disappearances for the Missouri Historical Review. His manuscript was rejected without explanation. In his correspondence with colleagues, Gannett expressed confusion about his inability to access certain public records that should have been readily available. The gaps form a pattern that becomes visible only when you know what should be there, but isn't. Gannett eventually abandoned the project after receiving what he described as a visit from two men claiming to represent the State Historical Society, though they presented no identification, and the society later denied sending anyone. According to Gannett's account, the men advised him that his research touched on matters of continuing sensitivity and suggested he focus his historical interests elsewhere. "It's as if someone has gone through the archives before me," he wrote, systematically removing specific documents while leaving the surrounding material intact. The 5 hunters who vanished in the Ozark Mountains in 1895 left behind families who mourned them, a community that searched for them, and questions that have never been fully answered. Their disappearance opened a window into possibilities most would prefer not to contemplate. That our understanding of reality remains incomplete. That wilderness contains more than trees and rocks and animals. That some boundaries once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Perhaps the truest assessment comes from Sheriff Crawford's journal in his final entry before resigning his position. Some truths should remain buried, not because we cannot understand them, but because understanding would change us in ways from which we could never return. In 1965, Martha Thornton, then in her final years, told an interviewer, "My father never went back to those woods, never hunted again, never spoke of what he found there, except to say that some places in this world aren't meant for us, not because we're unwelcome, but because we're unprepared for what awaits us there." In the decades since the original disappearances, the region has accumulated additional layers of mystery. Numerous researchers who have attempted to investigate the case have themselves experienced unusual phenomena. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a folklorist who conducted fieldwork in Shannon County in 1979, reported that recordings of her interviews with local residents about the 1895 incident would play back with unexplained gaps or be replaced entirely by what she described as a subtle humming punctuated by what might be words in an unrecognizable language. Reynolds abandoned her research after experiencing what she termed missing time. Driving on a rural road near the restricted area and suddenly finding herself 30 minutes away with no memory of the intervening journey 3 hours unaccounted for. Local residents have developed their own protocols for navigating the deeper regions of the Ozark wilderness. Interviews conducted by the Folklore Department of the University of Arkansas in 1992 revealed consistent patterns of behavior among longtime Shannon County families. They avoid certain areas entirely, particularly at dawn and dusk. They leave small offerings, coins, tobacco, or handcrafted items at trailheads before venturing into remote areas. They never travel alone in the backcountry. And perhaps most tellingly, they teach their children to avoid following anything or anyone you didn't enter the woods with, no matter how familiar they might appear. The 5 men who entered the Ozark wilderness in October 1895 were Thomas Blackwood, James Conley, William Hartley, Robert Fleming, and Charles Preston. Their bodies were never recovered. Their fate remains unknown. But something happened in those mountains that autumn. Something that has been glimpsed by others in the decades since. Something that continues to cast a long shadow over the deep hollows and ancient caves of that seemingly peaceful wilderness. For those who venture into the Ozark backcountry today, the official guidelines recommend staying on marked trails, maintaining communication with others, and returning to civilization before nightfall. Local residents might add another caution passed down through generations. If you hear whispered voices when no one is near, if you feel watched when alone, if you find yourself drawn toward unmarked caves or standing stones, turn back. Some paths are not meant to be followed. Some knowledge comes at too great a price. A park ranger who requested anonymity shared this observation in 2015. There are places in these hills where the silence has a quality to it. Not peaceful, but expectant, like something is listening to you. The old-timers call them thin places, where the border between here and somewhere else isn't quite solid. Most people feel uncomfortable and leave quickly. Some feel drawn to that silence. Those are the ones we sometimes don't see again. As for the 5 hunters from Springfield, perhaps they learned this truth too late. Or perhaps they made a choice, following something into the darkness that offered knowledge beyond conventional understanding. We may never know. The forests keep their secrets. The caves remain silent, and somewhere in the deep woods of the Ozarks, 5 men continue their endless journey, following a figure they can never quite see through passages that lead ever downward into darkness beyond our comprehension. An entry in the journal of William Hartley, the banker, was discovered in 1971 in the archives of the Springfield Historical Society, misfiled among tax records. The single page, apparently torn from a personal diary, is dated October 11, 1895, the day before the hunting party departed. It reads, "Conley believes he has located the source of the phenomena he's been studying. Says the indigenous people avoided certain valleys for reasons their descendants can no longer articulate." Blackwood is skeptical, but interested enough to organize this expedition under the guise of a hunting trip. Preston and Fleming know nothing of our true purpose, nor does my dear Helen. Better they remain ignorant. If Conley is correct, we stand at the threshold of a discovery that will reshape our understanding of natural law. If he is wrong, we lose nothing but a few days in the woods. Either way, I've left this record and my affairs in order. Some instinct tells me we are venturing where few have gone, and from which fewer have returned. In the Shannon County Courthouse archives, a single document remains from the original investigation. A faded telegram sent from Sheriff Crawford to the Springfield authorities on October 30th, 1895. It reads simply, "Search concluded. No evidence found. Case closed." Below this official text, barely visible and apparently added in haste, are the words, "They went willingly. God help us all." A final note of interest. In 1998, during renovation of the old bank building in Springfield, once owned by William Hartley, construction workers discovered a sealed metal box inside a wall cavity. The box contained 5 identical pocket watches, each stopped at 317. Each watch bore the initials of one of the missing hunters. According to the construction foreman, the watches appeared brand new with no signs of age or wear, despite having presumably been hidden for over a century. Before authorities could examine the watches, they allegedly disappeared from the secure room where they were being stored. No official record of their discovery exists. The construction workers who found them refused to discuss the matter further, and the renovation project was completed without additional incident. Whether this story represents fact, folklore, or fabrication remains unclear. A fitting final note to a mystery that has remained impenetrable for over a century.